October 2022. Vietnam. In a luxurious penthouse on the 28th floor, Truong My Lan is having breakfast with a view of the Saigon River. On the table, documents for a new contract worth tens of millions of dollars. Behind her, a personal bodyguard. Just another ordinary morning in the life of the most powerful woman in the country. Lan is one of the richest women in Vietnam. She controls over 1,000 real estate properties, dozens of development companies, and shopping malls across the country. And most importantly, a controlling stake in one of the nation's largest banks. She believes she's untouchable, but downstairs, police officers are already stepping into the elevator and pressing the 28 button. In just a few minutes, they'll knock on her door, and everything will change. By evening, her name will be in headlines around the world, and she'll be behind bars for a massive $44 billion banking fraud, and for crimes that, in Vietnam, are still punishable by death. Truong My Lan wasn't born into power, she built it. In the 1990s, she started with a small cosmetics shop in Ho Chi Minh City. Within a few years, she owned real estate across the city center. One building turned into five into 50. And in less than a decade, she controlled more commercial real estate in Saigon than anyone else. Office towers, hotels, shopping malls, even entire districts were registered under dozens of shell companies. On paper, these assets belong to hundreds of legal entities, often registered to her employees, relatives, or offshore firms. But behind every contract, every deal, every decision, stood Lan. Her empire grew rapidly during the real estate boom of the 2000s. As the middle class expanded, so did demand for apartments, offices, and retail space. Lan had the supply, and she had the connections. But there was still one element missing: control over capital. In 2011, an opportunity arose. Under government pressure, 3 failing banks merged to avoid collapse. That's how Saigon Commercial Bank, or SCB, was born. By law, no investor could hold more than 5% of the bank's shares. But Lan used dozens of proxies to gain de facto control. She wasn't listed in documents, she wasn't CEO. But according to witnesses and investigators, Lan appointed bank executives, gave direct instructions to the board, and personally influenced loan approvals. From that moment, her empire became self-financing. SCB began issuing massive loans, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, to companies controlled by Lan. They had no income, but the loans were granted anyway. There was never any intention to repay them. The goal was to extract funds from the bank into structures owned by Lan. To keep the scheme going, she needed more deposits. SCB launched an aggressive campaign: high interest rates, promotions for new depositors, flashy advertising. Hundreds of thousands of everyday citizens, pensioners, teachers, small business owners, started putting their savings in the bank. They had no idea SCB was already rotting from the inside. Lan kept building. Between 2012 and 2020, she launched new mega projects: skyscrapers in Saigon, resorts on Phu Quoc Island, massive shopping complexes. She became a symbol of Vietnamese success. Her photos appeared on magazine covers. Politicians shook her hand. Her wealth was estimated in billions, and no regulator saw the danger because no one saw the full picture. Lan ran everything personally and believed she was untouchable. Until October 2022, when 3 police officers pressed the elevator button. After Truong My Lan gained effective control of SCB, she began using the bank as her private vault. Over the next decade, from 2012 to 2022, SCB issued more than 2,500 loans that had nothing to do with real business. Most of the borrower companies existed only nominally. They had no revenue, no staff, often not even an office. This system worked because of an unprecedented number of proxies. Over 100 people through whom Lan registered companies, opened accounts, and signed contracts. But she alone made the decisions. All the strings led back to one office and one face. The real money was then funneled into affiliated companies, moved offshore, withdrawn in cash, or funneled into construction projects that Lan also controlled. In this way, the bank's client deposits were converted into assets for her business empire. According to investigators, over 90% of SCB's entire loan portfolio consisted of fraudulent loans. That's tens of billions of dollars. In 2022, the total amount of loans mentioned in the case exceeded $44 billion, more than half of Vietnam's annual budget. And some sources say she even stored part of the cash in the basements of her homes. For several years, the bank stayed afloat thanks to new deposits. But the money disappeared immediately into the loan scheme, and servicing old debt became increasingly difficult. The financial pyramid began to wobble. By 2021, SCB had effectively lost liquidity. Payout delays became routine. Some clients couldn't withdraw their savings, but the bank didn't disclose any problems. Instead, it turned to the central bank for more loans. The State Bank of Vietnam issued billions of dollars in support, hoping to avoid collapse. Still trying to maintain control, Truong My Lan continued operating through loyal executives who followed her orders. She bribed top politicians, law enforcement, and even employees. But eventually, central authorities began to suspect that SCB wasn't facing temporary trouble. It had a systemic hole. In fall 2022, an internal audit began, and Lan realized for the first time that things were slipping out of control. She tried to delay the process, influence the auditors, and persuade officials. But this time, it was too late. The financial black hole she created had swallowed the entire bank, and very soon, the whole world would know. October 2022. Less than 12 hours after Lan was arrested in her penthouse, the Vietnamese government made it official. Saigon Commercial Bank was placed under state management. All operations were frozen. Inspectors from the Central Bank and Ministry of Finance were deployed to every branch. This wasn't an audit anymore. It was a full-scale purge. The investigation that began would become the largest financial probe in Vietnam's history. For more than a year, investigators checked records, cross-referenced accounts, and tracked transactions. In December 2023, the prosecutor's office released preliminary figures. Over $44 billion had been siphoned out of the bank, all through fake loans issued to shell companies that never repaid. The scheme implicated dozens of people, relatives, lawyers, bank executives, even government officials who helped approve the loans. More than 80 individuals were prosecuted, including Truong My Lan's husband and the bank's CEO, her own niece. Many were arrested, others agreed to cooperate. In March 2024, the trial began and lasted just 1 month. The proceedings were fast-tracked, no delays, daily hearings, full media coverage. The public was shocked. Lan denied wrongdoing, claiming she never meant to defraud the state and had trusted her subordinates. But the court didn't agree. In April 2024, Truong My Lan was found guilty of embezzling state funds, abuse of power, and bribery. The sentence? Death by firing squad. It became a symbol of the government's determination and a shock to the international community. A woman once dubbed Vietnam's real estate queen now sat on death row.
To Vietnam, where a property tycoon has been sentenced to death in the country's biggest ever financial fraud case. Truong My Lan was one of 85 people on trial for embezzling $12.5 billion.
But there was one crucial clause. The death sentence could be commuted to life imprisonment if Truong My Lan returned at least 75% of the proven damages. Not the full $44 billion, but the $12 billion that had been definitively confirmed in court. To avoid execution, Lan needed to return about $9 billion. For the Vietnamese government, this was a deal too. In the middle of a crisis of confidence in the banking system, and with thousands of SCB depositors still locked out of their funds, every dollar in compensation mattered. As of August 2025, Truong My Lan remains in custody, awaiting her appeal. Some assets have already been seized: real estate, bank accounts, corporate shares. Authorities are trying to trace the rest through offshore companies, fake firms, and proxies. But many of the assets are likely gone. So far, less than 15% of the confirmed amount has been recovered. If that number doesn't rise, the execution may go forward. The woman who thought she was untouchable, who spent decades building an empire of fake loans and shadow deals, now sits on death row. She has one chance left to return the billions. But time is running out, and the final chapter of this story has yet to be told. I make videos myself, and it's quite a labor-consuming and expensive process, so your best gratitude would be a like and a subscription. Thank you.